Watch me pick a fight with a stereotype you probably didn't know you believed, and then test it in real conversations across Europe. If what you hear challenges your mental map of Spain, tell me where you think I'm wrong, and why. I learned something the hard way. If you ask a Northern European about Spain at a winter party, you'll hear about sun before you hear about Spaniards. That order matters. It reveals an unspoken hierarchy of associations that many of us carry around without noticing. When I started collecting impressions from friends, colleagues, academics, and strangers in airports, I expected to hear a variety of clichés. What I did not expect was how consistently those clichés grouped by region and how differently Spain is seen from the north, the east, and the center of Europe. In this first part, I am not here to flatter or to provoke for its own sake. I am here to give a clean slice of what Europeans say about Spaniards and what those perceptions may say about Europe itself. From the north, the first story is rhythm. In cities where the morning begins with quiet trains and early coffee, Spain appears as a country with a different metronome. A northern colleague once told me that doing business in Spain is like dancing on a floor that tilts after lunch. He meant the late meals, the longer conversations, the elastic schedule, the tendency to push deadlines into the late afternoon or even the night. He admired it and feared it at the same time. He admired the social oxygen in Spanish life, the sense that time is a medium for people rather than a ruler to measure them. He feared the uncertainty that comes with that elasticity, the way plans can expand like bread in an oven. Northern respect for punctuality is not a trivial preference, it is a moral language. When a meeting starts late, it reads as disrespect. When a call goes unanswered, it reads as unreliability. So, when the North sees Spain, it often translates difference as defect. But the translation cuts both ways. Spaniards watching a northern calendar sometimes see a deficit of warmth and a surplus of bureaucracy. Another northern story is integrity through institutions. In northern eyes, trust lives in systems rather than in favors. You follow the process because that is how the community survives. In this frame, Spain carries a reputation for creativity within systems, which is a polite way of saying that rules bend in the presence of common sense or social obligation. The North suspects that social networks in Spain do more work than rules do. This suspicion is not always hostile. It can sound like envy. After all, when institutions become too cold, people long for a human door to knock on. Still, the Northern ideal is that you should not need to know the right person to get the right outcome. The Spanish ideal, as many Spaniards explain it to me, is that institutions serve people, not the other way around, and when a rule contradicts life, life wins. That difference generates admiration when the outcome is merciful and criticism when the outcome looks like favoritism. Work ethic is the third Northern theme. The stereotype is familiar. Spain equals leisure, beaches, late nights, siestas, long holidays. But the North is not blind to evidence. Many in the North now also associate Spain with sophisticated infrastructure, world-class restaurants that operate with surgical precision, and engineers whose English is clean and whose code is cleaner. The contradiction between the lazy stereotype and the visible results creates cognitive friction. To resolve it, some Northerners say that Spaniards work hard, but only when they must, and they savor downtime without guilt. Others say that Spain has pockets of excellence surrounded by a relaxed baseline. Spaniards I spoke with counter that the Northern picture is out of date, that productivity is a story of sectors, not national character, and that long days are common even if the clock shows a later start. The truth, of course, is messy. But the Northern mind often prefers edges to gradients, and so Spain remains a paradox, a place where joy is visible and grind is less performative. From the East, the story shifts from rhythm to resilience. For many in Central and Eastern Europe, Spain is proof that you can recover from a deep crisis without losing your sense of self. When I ask Eastern friends about Spain, they point to the way Spaniards endured severe unemployment and still protected a culture of street life. They admire the micro-solidarities of neighborhoods, the habit of sharing small plates and long conversations as acts of everyday resistance. They see Spain as political drama on a balcony above a street that refuses to abandon its rituals. Some also add a sharper note. They see a country strong in identity but burdened by tension between its regions and its capital, a tension that is part of Spain's energy and part of its strain. For people who know the weight of centralization and the cost of its absence, Spain looks like a living laboratory for balancing unity and diversity. Easterners often pay attention to language in a way that Northern friends do not. They notice that Spanish identity includes multiple languages and that these languages are not museum pieces. They shape where people work, whom they vote for, how they imagine their children's futures. Eastern Europe carries its own experience with languages that mark memory, dignity, and vulnerability. So, when Easterners talk about Spain, they listen for the political baseline under the melody of tourism. For them, Spain is not only paella and plazas, it is a test case for whether a modern state can honor several deep identities without turning into a permanent family argument. When Easterners are optimistic, they say that Spain's cultural pluralism is a strength that keeps the national imagination agile. When they are skeptical, they say that pluralism becomes paralysis when economic shocks demand common decisions. Another Eastern optic is mobility. Many Eastern Europeans know Spain through relatives who moved there for work or through the return stories of those who tried life in Spain and then came back. These stories rarely match the tourist brochure. They describe employers who are kind and employers who are not, paperwork that takes longer than it should, communities that close around outsiders and communities that open their arms. They talk about learning Spanish not as a hobby, but as a survival strategy. From this angle, Spaniards are described as warm in person and sometimes distant in institutions, quick to welcome socially and slow to integrate professionally. That contrast is not uniquely Spanish, but Spain becomes a mirror for hopes and frustrations that Easterners carry from their own transitions. The success stories matter. A cousin who started a small business, a friend who became a nurse in a seaside town and sends back not only money, but new habits. These successes feed a larger Eastern perception. Spain is not merely a place to rest, it is a place to rebuild. The center of Europe, by which I mean the countries around the continental crossroads, tends to read Spain through comparative history. In central eyes, Spain is both familiar and exotic. It shares the Catholic imprint, the love of public squares, the respect for grandmothers, the rhythm of holidays that organize the year. But Spain also carries the Atlantic wind, the idea that the world beyond Europe is not only a map but a historical memory. Central Europeans sometimes say that Spaniards act like people who have already seen the world and returned home. There is a settled confidence in Spanish manners, a lack of anxiety about international validation. In central capitals, where proximity to larger powers has shaped self-consciousness, this Spanish calm can look like arrogance or like maturity depending on the day. In central discourse, Spain is also a case study in modernization without erasure. Central Europeans remember their own dramatic transitions, factories closing, streets changing, new brands appearing like mushrooms after rain. They see in Spain a longer arc, a gradual weaving of old and new, where a high-speed train can glide past a vineyard that has been tended by the same family since before their great-grandparents were born. That image is not romantic, it is logistical. It says that modernization is infrastructure and identity at the same time. When Central Europeans praise Spain, they praise exactly this: the ability to invest in the future without turning your back on the plaza. When they criticize Spain, they worry that nostalgia can mask inertia, that the love of the familiar can resist reforms that would make life fairer and growth more inclusive. Across these regions, food acts as a simple theory of Spain. Northerners describe meals as beautifully social but inefficient. Easterners describe meals as a school of belonging, where you learn how to be with people without performance. Central Europeans describe meals as continuity. The table is where families become archives. Spaniards themselves push back on all of this. They say that the way they eat is not a performance for tourists or a nostalgic ritual. It is their default setting for handling difference. You do not shout ideas across a table. You pass plates, you slow down, you let the argument breathe. I am convinced that this is not a trivial cultural trait. It is a technology for coexistence. The North, the East, and the Center all know how badly that technology is needed. The question is whether they trust it. Work, again, is a battlefield of perceptions. Northern friends admire Spanish business clusters in technology, design, energy, and logistics, but they still say that a Spanish project will include a last-minute scramble that could have been avoided with earlier discipline. Eastern friends note how Spanish firms have invested in their cities and trained local teams, and they insist that Spanish managers are more forgiving of human problems than some other Western counterparts. Central friends emphasize management style. They say Spaniards negotiate hard but smile while doing it, that they are loyal to partners who prove reliable, and that they prefer the politics of relationships to the politics of memos. All three groups, when pressed, concede that they do business with Spaniards because the outcomes are good, the creativity is applied rather than abstract, and the risk appetite is real but rarely reckless. Politics enters through side doors. The North worries about governance and transparency. The East watches how Spain handles territorial questions, immigration, and the social contract. The Center evaluates whether Spain will align with continental priorities or choose national interests when the two diverge. Here, the Spanish reply is consistent. Spain does not define itself in opposition to Europe. It sees Europe as a frame that can stretch without breaking. That confidence is not always admired. Some Northern critics call it complacency. Some Eastern critics call it wishful thinking. Some Central critiques say it is a luxury available to countries with warm seas and soft power. Yet I keep hearing a less cynical interpretation from all sides. Spain operates with a deep belief that social life can absorb stress if you keep people connected. That belief is old and stubborn and hard to quantify. One point of near consensus is hospitality. Even the most skeptical Northern engineer will tell you that a Spanish host makes you feel like a person before you are a role. An Eastern nurse will tell you that Spanish colleagues ask about your family and mean it. A Central academic will tell you that Spanish conferences are organized with an eye toward human contact, not only paper presentations. There is a danger in praising hospitality, of course. It can become a way to avoid talking about harder issues, like pay, paperwork, or power, but I do not want to reduce it. In a continent where loneliness is rising, a culture that institutionalizes presence deserves more than a footnote. There is also a shared curiosity about Spanish resilience in the face of shocks. The North wants to know how communities stay vibrant when the economy stalls. The East wants to know how dignity is maintained when institutions disappoint. The Center wants to know how reforms are sold without breaking ties to tradition. Spaniards answer with examples that are boring to headline writers and essential to civic health. Parent councils that function, neighborhood associations that clean and mediate, small companies that keep apprenticeships alive, city halls that invest in sidewalks, bus lanes, and cultural centers. Spain's genius, in this telling, is not spectacular. It is cumulative. It adds up in streets that welcome you at midnight and in mornings where the city still works. I cannot finish this first part without addressing the heaviest stereotype of all, the idea that Spaniards are more emotional than rational. It is easy to weaponize this, but the people who repeat it rarely define emotion with seriousness. Emotion is not the enemy of reason. It is the energy that moves reason from plan to action. What the North calls emotion can be, in practice, attentiveness to context. What the East calls emotion can be moral memory. What the Center calls emotion can be commitment to community. Spaniards recognize that analysis without attachment is not leadership. They also recognize that attachment without analysis is not governance. When outsiders mistake Spanish warmth for unseriousness, they reveal a narrow idea of seriousness. So, where does this leave us? With a map of perceptions that says as much about the observer as the observed. The North wants reliability and sees in Spain a charming partner who must be managed. The East wants dignity and sees in Spain a path from hardship to livable normality. The center wants continuity with adaptation and sees in Spain a mirror of its own balancing act. These readings do not cancel each other. They overlay like transparent sheets. If you hold them up to the light, a fuller picture emerges. Spain as a society that prefers social strength to institutional coldness, improvisation backed by competence, local loyalties that do not forbid national or European commitments, and a public life that treats strangers like future friends. In the next part, I will test these impressions against data and against Spanish voices who disagree with me, and I will ask whether Europe is ready to learn from Spain not as a vacation fantasy, but as a civic model. For now, I want to ask you to interrogate your own mental image. When you think of Spain, which comes first, the place or the people? And if your answer embarrasses you a little, what does that say about how stereotypes travel? What part of your own experience with Spain either confirms or contradicts what I have laid out here? And what would you most like me to pressure test in the next episode? Mira lo que nunca te contaron. Cuando fuera de España hablan de nosotros. Casi siempre comienzan por el sol y la comida, y casi nunca por las personas. ¿Y si te demuestro que esa inversión del orden explica más de lo que parece sobre cómo nos mira Europa? Lo aprendí a golpes, escuchando en bares de aeropuerto, en videollamadas con clientes y en pasillos de congresos. Cuando europeos del norte, del este y del centro hablan de España, usan lentes distintos y a veces contradictorios. No me interesa el halago fácil ni la provocación por la provocación. Me interesa entender por qué nos ven como nos ven y qué podemos hacer con esa mirada. Empiezo por una constatación incómoda. Para muchos del norte, nuestra relación con el tiempo parece indisciplinada. Para muchos del este, nuestra manera de resistir las crisis es admirable y extraña. Para muchos del centro, somos el caso de estudio de cómo modernizar sin borrar. En este recorrido voy a poner en orden las percepciones que he recogido, compararlas con lo que vivimos dentro y proponer un criterio para separarlas en lo útil y lo inútil. Desde el norte, lo primero que aparece es el ritmo. En ciudades donde el día arranca con cafés tempranos y trenes silenciosos, España se ve como un país con metrónomo propio. A veces lo dicen con ternura, a veces con fastidio. Comidas tardías, sobremesas largas, citas que se mueven al final de la tarde. Noches donde el trabajo se resuelve cuando en otros sitios ya han apagado la luz. Detrás de ese juicio hay una ética. Para el norte, la puntualidad no es cortesía decorativa, es la forma de mostrar respeto. Cuando un encuentro empieza tarde, se lee como falta de consideración. Cuando no se responde a tiempo, se interpreta como falta de fiabilidad. Y, sin embargo, los mismos que nos critican reconocen que en España la conversación tiene una densidad que da frutos. Aprendí que, para ellos, la elasticidad del horario es riesgo. Para nosotros, a menudo, es la manera de que la vida siga entrando por la puerta sin pedir permiso. El segundo rasgo que el norte subraya es la relación con las instituciones. Allí la confianza se deposita en los sistemas, aquí, muchas veces, en las personas. En esa diferencia se crea la sospecha de que entre nosotros las redes informales mandan más que los procedimientos. La sospecha puede venir con envidia. Cuando los sistemas se enfrían, todos añoran una puerta humana en la que tocar. Pero no dejemos de decir lo obvio. Cuando una red sustituye a una regla, alguien queda fuera. Para el norte, ese alguien es una injusticia. Para nosotros, a veces, la excepción salva a quien la regla aplasta. Resolver esa tensión requiere dos virtudes que no siempre están juntas: competencia y criterio. Cuando tenemos ambas, la flexibilidad parece sabiduría. Cuando falta una, la flexibilidad parece favoritismo. El norte también arrastra el tópico del ocio infinito. Ya lo he oído 1000 veces. Playas, siestas, fiestas, vacaciones eternas. Luego, esos mismos interlocutores elogian la precisión de nuestros restaurantes, la calidad de nuestros ingenieros, la logística de nuestros puertos, la potencia de nuestras empresas energéticas. La manera en que acomodan esa contradicción dice mucho. Algunos concluyen que trabajamos duro pero sin hacer espectáculo de la dureza. Otros, que hay islas de excelencia en un mar templado. Yo suelo contestar que la productividad no es un rasgo nacional, sino sectorial, y que la puesta en escena del esfuerzo varía por cultura. El norte tiende a preferir aristas, Nosotros, gradientes. Y ahí chocan las narrativas. Desde el este, la clave no es el ritmo, sino la resiliencia. Para muchos centroeuropeos y esteeuropeos, España es la prueba de que se puede salir de una crisis profunda sin perder el pulso de la calle. Cuando les pregunto, me hablan de barrios que siguieron llenando las plazas, aunque faltara el trabajo, de vínculos que se activaron para sostener a quien se caía, de una normalidad obstinada que no depende del bolsillo. También me hablan de la tensión entre regiones y centro como energía y como desgaste. Ellos conocen el precio de centralizar demasiado y el coste de no coordinar lo suficiente. España les interesa como laboratorio vivo de equilibrio entre unidad y diversidad. El este escucha con mucha atención el tema de las lenguas. No lo ve como adorno, lo ve como estructura. Entienden que la identidad española es plural y que esa pluralidad no es un folleto. Condiciona empleo, educación, lealtades y proyectos de vida. Como vienen de historias marcadas por idiomas que fueron refugio y herida, miran a España con sensibilidad especial. Y se preguntan si un Estado moderno puede honrar identidades profundas sin convertir el Parlamento en una discusión interminable. Cuando están optimistas, dicen que nuestra pluralidad es músculo. Cuando están escépticos, que la pluralidad se convierte en parálisis ante los choques. Otra óptica oriental es la movilidad. Muchos conocen España por familiares que vinieron a trabajar, por temporadas que vivieron aquí o por amigos que fueron y volvieron. Sus relatos no son postal. Hablan de jefes generosos y jefes arbitrarios, de papeles que tardan más de lo razonable, de barrios que se cierran y de barrios que adoptan. Describen la lengua no como afición, sino como salvavidas. Desde ahí, los españoles aparecemos como cálidos en lo personal, y a veces lentos en lo institucional, rápidos para acoger en la mesa y pausados para integrar en la carrera profesional. Esa mezcla no es exclusiva nuestra, pero España se convierte en espejo de sus propias esperanzas y decepciones. Importa que también cuentan historias de éxito. El primo que monta negocio, la amiga que trabaja de sanitaria junto al mar y manda dinero y hábitos de vuelta. Esas historias alimentan una conclusión. España no es solo descanso, es reconstrucción posible. El centro de Europa nos mira con lente comparada. Peruana o francesa no, continental y católica, de plazas y mercados, pero con viento atlántico y memoria global. Dicen que aquí hay una serenidad que no pide permiso a nadie para existir. En capitales donde la proximidad a gigantes obliga a la cautela, ese aplomo puede parecer soberbia o madurez según quien mire. Al centro también le interesa nuestro modo de modernizar sin borrar. Ven trenes veloces junto a viñedos familiares, parques tecnológicos cerca de cascos históricos que siguen cumpliendo su función social. No romántico, sino práctico. Inversión en futuro sin retirar el banco de la plaza. Cuando nos elogian, elogian eso. Cuando nos critican, señalan el riesgo de que el cariño por lo conocido se convierta en excusa para no tocar lo que hay que tocar. La comida, para todos, funciona como teoría portátil de España. Norte. Social y deliciosa, pero ineficiente. Este. Escuela de pertenencia sin impostura. Centro. Continuidad que convierte la mesa en archivo familiar. Yo añado mi conclusión operativa. La mesa es tecnología cívica. Nos enseña a discutir sin romper, a desacelerar cuando la temperatura sube, a reconocer al otro incluso cuando pensamos que se equivoca. Europa entera necesita esa tecnología. La pregunta es si confía en ella. El trabajo es campo de batalla simbólico. Amigos del norte admiran clústeres tecnológicos, diseño, energías y logística, pero se preparan para un sprint final que les gustaría evitar. Amigos del este reconocen inversión, formación y una tolerancia más humana ante los problemas personales. Colegas del centro hablan de estilo directivo, negociación dura con sonrisa, lealtad a los socios fiables, preferencia por la política de relaciones frente a la política del memorando. Los tres, cuando bajan al resultado, admiten que trabajan con españoles porque los proyectos salen, la creatividad es aplicada y el riesgo se calcula con ambición pero sin suicidio. La política entra de lado. El norte se preocupa por la transparencia y la estabilidad regulatoria. El este observa nuestro manejo de la cuestión territorial, la inmigración y el pacto social. El centro evalúa si priorizamos lo europeo o lo nacional cuando chocan. La respuesta española más frecuente no es antieuropea, es de confianza en que el marco común se puede estirar sin romperse. A unos les suena a complacencia, a otros a deseo. Yo lo leo como una apuesta. Si mantienes a la gente conectada, la sociedad absorbe golpes. Esa creencia es antigua, terca y difícil de medir, pero se ve en detalles que no hacen titulares y construyen salud pública. Asociaciones vecinales, escuelas con familias implicadas, pymes que forman aprendices, ayuntamientos que invierten en aceras, carriles bus y centros culturales. Casi todos coinciden en algo: hospitalidad. Incluso el ingeniero más rígido del norte admite que un anfitrión español te trata como persona antes que como rol. Una enfermera del este cuenta que tus colegas preguntan por tu familia y lo dicen en serio. Un académico del centro reconoce que nuestros congresos están pensados para el encuentro humano, no solo para el paper. El elogio de la hospitalidad puede ser coartada para no hablar de salarios, papeles o poder. No debería. En un continente con soledad creciente, institucionalizar la presencia es un acto político. Queda el estereotipo más pesado: somos emocionales antes que racionales. Fácil de usar como arma, difícil de definir con rigor. La emoción no es enemiga de la razón, es lo que la pone en marcha. Lo que el norte llama emoción es, muchas veces, atención al contexto. Lo que el este llama emoción es memoria moral. Lo que el centro llama emoción es compromiso con la comunidad. Gobernar bien exige análisis y apego. Cuando nos toman la calidez por falta de seriedad, dejan ver una idea estrecha de la seriedad. ¿Para qué nos sirve este mapa? Para dejar de reaccionar y empezar a elegir. Si sabemos cómo nos miran, podemos decidir cuándo explicar, cuándo corregir, cuándo ignorar. Podemos defender nuestras virtudes sin convertirlas en dogma y enfrentar nuestras fallas sin disfrazarlas de folclore. En el próximo vídeo, quiero poner a prueba estas percepciones con ejemplos concretos, desde cómo programamos horarios escolares hasta cómo atraemos talento extranjero sin precarizar. Pero antes, quiero escucharte a ti. ¿Cuál de estas miradas externas te parece más justa y cuál te parece más dañina para nuestro futuro? ¿Y qué ejemplo real propondrías para desmontarla o confirmarla?